be to make her little speech about respectful questions.
Oh, okay, I'll pass the mic down.
Thank you.
So thank you. Isn't this a great forum today? Can we just take a breath right now? Because there's a lot of stuff here, right? And it's weighty. It's not an easy topic. And when I proposed doing this, in fact, it was brought up at one of our interfaith meetings to have this topic. And a couple of people on the board said, oh my goodness, that's intense. And I said, you know what though? We can do this. And the reason we can do this, and we can have a discussion now about this, a respectful discussion, is because just as it has been spoken, that we're not doing this, it's not being done, but we're modeling it. So all those who are watching, take note that this is how you have such a type of discussion and a panel. And I hope that people will watch this, and that this will become something in the future in places that really need to bring in people from different religions, different perspectives, different legal perspectives, and model a discussion. So here's how it's going to go. If you have a question, not if you have an announcement about your own event, that comes later. You can come up and share with that at the very end. But if you have a comment or really a question right now, this isn't a monologue. This is just an opportunity for as many people as possible to state their respectful questions. They may be very different from what is spoken here, but let's model to the rest of the world that we can do this. Thank you. And so Ron will be, thank you, and Ron will be taking the mic and asking people questions.
In the Phoenix City Council situation with the invocations, one of the council people brought up that he felt that the group that was giving the invocation to Satanists were not a religion. So what I'd like to know is, how do the panelists define a religion for purposes of the First Amendment? What is a religion? Is it a religion? I know that in doing some very quick research on this, the Supreme Court hasn't been real definitive on it. But how do you choose?
Thank you.
Well, I think, to me, one of the great things about the First Amendment is its religion or the lack thereof. I mean, it certainly is a constitutional protection against a state-run religion, but it's also a constitutional protection for people who opt to not participate in religion. So I think you need to be very broad in the way for public purposes that you define a religion. A religion can also mean lack of a religion. The Phoenix City Council issue, I have a great deal of empathy, obviously, for the debate. I'm glad they went first. But it is, I've had, probably all of us have had lots of conversations about what's the right answer in that situation, because it's a little perplexing. My understanding of the group that kind of provoked this discussion is not actually, they don't actually worship a deity named Satan. They adopted that name just because they thought that the idea of Satan was a representation of someone who was not a nonconformist, and that if they were allowed to offer their version of a prayer, it would not, in fact, be something that would be worshipful of Satan. So it might not have been as offensive in fact, had it been allowed to play through. Having said that, I understand you saw that the emotional reaction in the community and what a difficult issue that was to deal with. I suspect it's an issue that at some point my community will be confronted with as well. The only, I guess, insight I would say is I think all of us that are in the position of being elected officials, when we are sworn in, what are we swearing? We swear that we'll uphold the United States Constitution. And I have a great deal of reverence for the First Amendment to the United States Constitution. And like I say, I think we need to, that's my job, is to make sure that everyone in the community, regardless of their faith or lack thereof, feels like they're honored and respected and participating in government.
What is a religion? And you
Oh, I'm sorry.
I
don't have a good definition of religion, but I do want to kind of comment on the Satanist issue. And that is, John Stuart Mill wrote an essay defending liberty. And he had 3 reasons why you should respect the ability of people who disagree with you to express themselves. The first was they might be right and you might be wrong. Well, on a lot of issues, that's not very persuasive to a lot of people. The second was that they may not be right now, but they may be right sometime in the future. It's good to keep the ideas alive. Again, if it's something you strongly disagree with, I don't think it's very persuasive. The third argument I thought was very persuasive, and that is that having to deal with opinions that you disagree with makes you much stronger in the opinions that you have. If you have to defend your opinions against criticisms, it's like exercising a muscle. And if your opinion is the only opinion there is, you become relaxed and your muscle becomes flaccid. So, as an example, I remember when I was in the legislature, the Phoenix Art Museum had an artist's rendition where you had to walk on an American flag and there was to reach a toilet. And it was pretty shocking. But what was the result? There were demonstrations of patriotism all over the city, more than I ever remember seeing before, because people reacted to that by affirming their own views. And so we have to think, I think, of giving freedom to other people to express opinions we strongly disagree with, such as, in this case, Satanism, in part because it gives us the ability to strengthen our own views, and I think it makes for a much more interesting life. I'd love to see a prayer by a Satanist. I've never seen one. And so I think if we think about the basis for individual freedom, the more shocking and controversial an opinion is, in some ways, the most useful it can be in strengthening our own muscles and dealing with our own beliefs.
I'm going to state my name, and I wish everyone that didn't ask the question would state their name. You reminded us to do that last month.
Thank you.
Okay. Candace Dillman, Santan Valley. There's an area you haven't addressed, and I'm going to give a couple of examples, and I'd love to hear how you feel about this. One, it has to do with private enterprise and employees. In one, a woman who was a Jehovah's Witness worked for a restaurant that sang for birthdays and celebrated birthdays. And because of her belief, she refused to sing or even deliver the little birthday cupcake. So all these 2 cases I'm going to mention, the courts decide on it, but I'm curious, there are examples of this type of situation. The other is UPS. A woman wanted to become a driver, one of the higher paid jobs for that company, but her religion would not allow her to wear pants. So she made a skirt of brown material. But you have to wear the uniform because UPS has so many problems with people not opening the door, being afraid anyway, that they don't allow anyone, even people with turbans, they will not allow this. So that cuts out a lot of potential people who could have these higher paid jobs. So I'm just curious how you feel about that situation.
Question. Who gets the mic?
We'll start off with the non-lawyer. Put him on the spot.
Before I deal with that, I want to just real quickly on the parish. Many years ago, a leader in our church was faced with a congressional congress in Washington. And part of that process there, he asked if he could say a prayer, right? And there was questions amongst many, but ultimately they said yes, because they were recognizing the right to say prayer from your belief, from your conscience, in a public forum. So I, with you, Tom, believe that there is nothing that should prohibit any individual to say a basis of their belief in a prayer or other in a public forum. I think that's a fundamental thing that we should respect, and certainly through my experience in interfaith, that was a strengthening of people's beliefs when they had to discourse with others. In terms of when we take this, though, into, for me, public institutions, what I mean by that is corporations. I think this is a question that we're going to face more and more as our society is changing, but also we have extended enormous rights to corporations in the past short little period of time, right? Citizens United, they have the freedom of speech, right? In this decision in Hobby Lobby, they actually have, in some ways, established freedom of religion, belief, as a corporation, right? So we're going to have to deal with what are the frameworks of rights of a corporation in terms of how it is implemented out into their activities. My guess is that one of the main things that happened in a situation like that was there were probably some issues about how that would affect people receiving packages. But my guess is that the overriding concern that UPS was liability, right? There were liability issues about wearing dresses and opening doors and walking onto property and people fought. But I would assume that there's a legal background in there that they fought against them. But I do think we have to look at this whole issue of how religion interfaces with corporations. It is becoming a bigger issue. And I'll give just one simple aside. I'm currently a consultant for a software company in San Francisco. They have developed over the past 12 years a very, very, very powerful artificial intelligence engine. And their projections of where artificial intelligence is going in the future is astounding, right? That within 10 years, software-driven computers are going to have a conscience. Are we going to give to them the rights and responsibilities, but also the freedoms to believe and think as they wish? And you can take it one step forward, which goes into the science fiction part of this. But what about a corporation owning a computer that has that ability? Right? Where that artificial intelligence, in a sense, becomes a citizen. Do we include them in the concept of we the people? Or do we not? So I do think there's a contextual framework here that is developing between religious freedom and law that is totally unresolved.
Your question is not a new one, even though it may be more prominent these days because you have, I think you have more acceptance of different faiths in our society. But it's the tension between religious freedom and private enterprise. In the Jewish community, for example, the whole issue about forcing somebody to work on Sabbath, which is Saturday, has been an issue. It's been dealt with many, many years ago. It's not a new issue. And the answer to that is, if my business is predominantly done on Saturday, I need people to work for me. If I can find an accommodation for the person to not work on Shabbos, then I would want to find an accommodation. If the waitress who doesn't celebrate birthdays and Christmas can be found another position or can be found to do something other than serving birthday cakes and those kinds of things to offend her sensibilities without too great a disruption, that's what I would be in favor of. We have a what's the Disability Act, you guys? Americans for Disability Acts that provides accommodations, requires employers to provide accommodations. Reasonable accommodations. Reasonable accommodations, exactly. Reasonable, of course, is the key to all of this. Reasonable is the key to any of this, and of course, we all have different concepts of what's reasonable. But I think the answer to that situation, the religious and private enterprise tension, is reasonable accommodation. Anybody else?
I would just apply the reasonable accommodation concept which we have in the law to the two examples you gave. In the case of the birthday, it would depend on, I would think, how many waiters and waitresses there were. If there were lots of them and other people could deliver the cupcakes without her having to do it, then you could accommodate her. If it was a small place and you really needed her to do her share, then it would be a different result. In the case of the skirt, I would think you could make a skirt look as close to a uniform as necessary to accomplish the ends of the employer. So on that, I would be 100% with the employee.
What about the turf?
What?
What about the turf?
Hang on, that's...
Well, the turban is ridiculous to ban a turban. I mean, I can't see any possible justification for
Well,
that.
that's the mic.
Yes. We've got Dr. Mesa right here.
Hare Krishna, my comment is about the cancellation of the meeting between Iranian, Khomeini and French government. Similar thing happened in Yugoslavia in 1965. Indian Prime Minister Shastri was visiting, and he is a Ghanaian, he can never touch wine. So in Europe, the custom is you have to raise the glass, touch it, toast, otherwise there is no friendship. So solution was suggested by a diplomat. He put orange juice in the glass for Shastri. And Tito took the wine, and both touched each other. So bottom line is, lesson is, you have to practice your faith according to time, circumstances, and place. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank
Yes, Gordon Posner Tollison. Full disclosure, I am a retired attorney and not admitted in Arizona, so don't ask me any advice on Arizona law. Mr. Horne, I agree with you. $100,000 for failing to bake a cake is absurd. But I also have to suggest, as a lawyer, and this is going to shock some people what I'm about to say, in a certain sense, in a practical sense, I see these kinds of lawsuits as absurd, and here's why. We're talking about personal service, taking a picture, baking a cake. It's very easy to sabotage that. So the question of the people seeking that service have to ask themselves is, which would they rather have? A successful event or a successful lawsuit? And speaking as a lawyer, I take a successful event over the lawsuit every single time. Which gets me to my point about RFRA and other laws. I have great problems with them because they are a blunderbuss approach to what is a very subtle and complicated area. And focusing just on those cases, which as I said before, many of them were about commitment ceremonies. The issue was discrimination against a group, not the actual event itself. I hope we all can agree that discrimination is wrong, whether it's against gays, blacks, Jews, Irish, elderly, or whatever. But I would suggest that rather than a broad general law, I'd like all your opinion, that's the question, it would be better to have a law tailored to personal services like that, with small companies or sole proprietorships. You know, I don't think Dunkin' Donuts, for example, should adopt the policy that they're not going to serve gays or blacks. And an additional requirement that the person who wants to invoke that law has to have available a list of alternative businesses in the area where they can suggest the person go to who won't discriminate. And finally, so everyone else knows about this, so we can allow the marketplace to decide that they must actually advertise that they do discriminate. And I'd just like to know your opinion about all that.
Mike is down there. Who would like to start? Someone wants to start.
I don't know why I'm anxious to answer this question. But I have been in the middle of a lot of conversations in the last year and a half on the non-discrimination ordinance issue, which is mayors and city councils all over the country are struggling with this issue. And there's, as you can imagine, a lot of good points to be made. We could literally talk the rest of the day about this, and I would love to do that, and I have spent days literally doing that. Non-discrimination ordinances around the country are fairly, I think most people would agree, most people of good faith would agree that when it comes to housing and employment and some very basic human rights, that it's the exception to find someone that objects to protecting those rights. Where you get into the problematic area is when you get into the area of public accommodation, where you're talking about the fine lines that you're talking about. If it's a mom and pop housing situation, ought they to be forced to house an LGBT couple? Or to what extent do you need to preserve someone's conscientious objection rights to say, for example, like in the Roe versus Wade situation, no, I disagree. And as a matter of conscience, because of my religious beliefs, I understand the state of the law, but I still would like to preserve my legal right to express that I disagree with that. And not be, as a matter of compulsion, forced to participate in something that you feel that religiously you cannot support. And there's, we're going to get to a reasonable accommodation, and at what point, do you tip from one side of the scale to the other? So communities across the nation are going to try to address that, and people are going to disagree with where you fall on those lines. We'll do it in my community, and we have had a lot of these same debates. At what point is regulation offensive to religious principles, and at what point is it offensive to civil liberty concerns? And like I say, that's where we could spend the rest of the day debating on what side of the line ought we to be. So I hope we get it right. I think probably we could pull everybody in this room and we'd have very few people that are exactly on the same page on where you draw that line. So I won't provoke a fist fight in the room by raising a lot of those questions, but we'll struggle with it. But I think as long as people of good faith come together and are somewhat forgiving and saying, well, this isn't exactly where I would come down on regulating public accommodation, but I agree with the good faith of the folks that were engaged in coming up with something to protect both religious freedom and individual liberties. Hopefully we'll figure it out.
For me, it goes back to my comment to you that I don't think laws are going to find the answer to this. I don't think RFRA is going to be the answer, and I don't think the law that you propose is going to be the answer either. My father always would say, he used to use a line, a great idea, poor execution. That's often the case with laws. They're always great, and RFRA is perfectly one of those things. So the answer is going to be for good people to get organized and get together and say, we want to approach these things in a reasonable standpoint.
I will say on the issue of what's being discussed here is that my personal faith basically believes in marriage. I mean, fundamentally believes in marriage. It's the fundamental core of our religious tradition. But that's my religious tradition, right? And I can have that conscience. I don't need to impose that out against the world because I have confidence in my own faith and my own beliefs that I can live my life freely in that way. On the issue of the public sphere of this, I will tell you, I have 2 teenage children. I know I look a little old for teenage children, but I do. And I'll tell you that some of these questions are going to just kind of dissipate within the next generation. My children, in where they're at, the issue of being gay, it's not an issue. It's not a concern to them at all. They're not affronted by it. They're not afraid about it. They just accept it as being part of being human. And it may not be how they see themselves, or that may not be how they experience my religious tradition with them. But we need to be thinking as a society that things are changing, have always been changing, but the pace of change is very fast. In one generation, we're going to see massive change of culture and the way that that interacts with citizens. So we should be cognizant of that as we're dealing with situations in our societies, our cities, our states, whatever, that this change is coming, and the more that we try to prevent that change, the more conflict will be created.
Yeah, so far, I believe the discussion has been concerned primarily with the conflict between certain principles of Christianity, mainly abortion and homosexuality and the rights of citizens. And then recently we've been talking about to what extent can employers be forced to accommodate the religious requests and wishes of the employees. That's becoming an ever-increasing the important question. And then there's another aspect of religious freedom which hasn't been talked about, As we know, religious freedom in the United States is limited to those practices which conform to American law. What do you do with a religion which requires violations of American law? I'm referring specifically to Sharia law and Islam, where Sharia law is required by the religion, and Sharia law violates American law in hundreds of ways. How do we deal with a religion that requires violation of American law?
Thank you.
Yeah, we've had this issue with respect to certain tribes that had to use, thought part of their religion were to use prohibited drugs. And we've had the issue with respect to polygamy, where the LDS Church at one time required polygamy and the law prohibited it. And I think the resolution of that has been that religion is not an excuse to violate the law. The law comes first. The law should make reasonable accommodations, but when you come into conflict with a fundamental precept, such as, we're not going to cut people's hands off or something like that from Sharia law, then the law prevails, and religion is not an excuse to violate the law.
I haven't heard a lot spoken, I haven't heard a lot spoken about the separation of church and state, and I'd like you to address why public verbal prayers at government-controlled meetings is allowed or so important. Anybody on the council, like the mayor did, anybody on the council can pray anytime they want. They can pray all during the meeting. I don't understand why we have to have public prayers that might offend, and it's come up with the city council, obviously, Phoenix. So I'd like your comments on it.
Well, the United States Supreme Court addressed this correctly, and they said that public prayers at public meetings are a very long tradition in this country. And so in order for it to not be unconstitutional, you have to give, you can't favor one religion, you have to give all the religions a chance and spread it around. And that's what gives rise to this Satan issue.
I promise I'll pass it down to the mayor. Let me weigh in on that. So there's the legal piece that Tom just mentioned when he was talking about. What's this? The city, some city up in New York. Greece. Yeah, Greece. I knew it was some country up in New York. It was an interesting decision in which they talked about this. We have this legislative prayer, and there's a long tradition of legislative prayer, although I'm not sure that really fits in the legislative prayer. By the facts of that case, it's kind of a fun case, and great. I encourage you to read Justice Kagan's dissent. She has a different view of the facts. But the question, your question, I don't think is a legal one. I think the question, if I'm hearing it correctly, is why the need for prayer at all under those circumstances? And I guess that gets to the question of the tension. I mean, I don't wear my religion on my sleeve, so I'm with you. I don't know why one would need to have prayer in a forum where there might be others who don't share those religious beliefs. I would, as respect to others, keep it to myself. But I get there are others who don't share that philosophy, and I understand that. That's where you have the tension, and the question then becomes is how do you resolve that tension? And there's no hard and fast rule. I don't think we can legislate that. We just got to use what makes sense under the circumstances.
Oh, thank you. I think the First Amendment and just the principles that our country was founded on is not to be afraid of religion. I'll use my community as an example. Mesa, Arizona, like all cities, has its strengths and its weaknesses. One of our strengths is the faith community. It's a diverse community. It's very engaged in service projects and in doing good things. Oftentimes, as the mayor, when I need something done, I reach out to the faith community, because that's how I know it will get done and it will happen quickly. And I'm grateful for all the positive things in my community as a result of having strong and diverse faith groups. So I think it's important for us to realize that religion and faith groups are a good thing. They contribute to our community. Now that's, again, we can look at it from an academic point of view and say we need to make sure that there's no inappropriate relationship between the church and the government. But at the same time, I think it's very appropriate for us to recognize the good things that the faith community brings to our community. So I get the Supreme Court case. I also get Phoenix's decision saying, you know what, it's such a problematic area, we're just going to opt out. I get that and I sympathize with it. But there are a lot of communities like Mesa that is a tradition that I think is important. And as long as we do it in a respectful way, I think we have been good about making sure we incorporate non-Christian prayers at the beginning of our meetings. And like I said, I'm very open to the idea of entertaining prayers from groups that aren't religious. Or I guess it wouldn't be a prayer, it'd be some sort of a statement. So I think we need to have a healthy attitude to this. We certainly, I've seen some examples, particularly on the internet lately, where prayers at the beginning of meetings were done in an inappropriate way, in a way that was somewhat discriminatory, and I was offended by it. So I think we need to be sensitive to it, but I agree with the Supreme Court in this case that it's a great tradition, and if done appropriately, with respect to all parties in our community, it's a nice tradition to preserve.
But it needs a new name other than prayer.
So now we have a question from a very familiar face.
I want to respond, Tom, to what you just said about obeying the laws over against your faith traditions. It concerns me, for example, when Nazism was in control. I remember, and you know, there was a German pastor named Bonhoeffer, and Mr. Bonhoeffer said, they came after the gypsies, and I didn't say anything, and they came after the Jews, and I didn't say anything, and they came after the gays, and I didn't say anything, and then they came after me. And there was nobody left to stand up and protest. I think someone's so thankful for this discussion today and for the panel that there is a point where those of us, regardless of our faith tradition, that we have some kind of a movement together that can protest against government issues that very frankly are just wrong. Nazism was wrong.
Yeah, reply to respond. I think that obviously you can disagree with government laws and government policies. Civil disobedience to government policies, I think, is justified only in extreme cases, such as the civil rights movement, not in cases below that level. And obviously, I agree with you in the case of Nazi Germany, but in the case, the question asked in the context of Sharia law, you know, there are a number of Muslims in our country who believe that in female genital mutilation, well, the law prohibits that. And I think the law prevails over that religious belief. You cannot justify female genital mutilation because of religious belief. The religious belief must give in to the law's requirement of respect for other people's bodies. So that was the context of my comment.
I have to just say one thing, and comment to Tom's comment, which you believe, if I heard you correctly, you don't believe only in extreme cases should there be civil disobedience of the government I don't share that view. I personally think civil disobedience in a respectful, appropriate way is a great lesson for our country and what makes the United States stand apart from other countries. Because I think that's how democracy is formed. And so, for example, the folks who occupy the place in Oregon, I have absolutely no respect for their methodology or their movement. I have the utmost respect for their right for peaceful civil disobedience for their views. And it's that right that I think makes the United States great and what supports our democracy.
Yeah, we are. So I'm so sorry. One last question right here. This lady has had her hand up, so very brief.
Thank you, Margaret. My question involves the desire of many people in Arizona, terminally ill, mentally incompetent, to obtain prescription medication to hasten their death. There's a lot of civil disobedience going on in that area. A recent poll of doctors in the county, highly unscientific study, but nevertheless interesting findings, found an extraordinary number, admitted anonymously, of course, that they did help terminally ill patients by providing prescription medication under the guise of some other ailment, but with the understanding and expectation that they might likely use it to hasten their deaths. I've looked at different religious views on this topic, and they're all over the place. And the result is that in Arizona, people, like in those circumstances, are forced to die according to the religious beliefs, not of their own religious beliefs, but according to the religious beliefs of somebody else. Now, I can't name the state legislature. Right now I'm thinking of Nancy Bartow. But anyway, I can't for the life of me understand why this is not a violation of the First Amendment.
Okay.
I mean, to be able to die according to your own religious beliefs.
Thank you.
But it just seems really, so maybe you can explain that.
Thank you. We are very short on time, so if we could do this very briefly, that would be wonderful. Who would like to address this?
Mr. Horne?
Sure. It seemed to be directed towards Mr. Horne.
Okay.
By the eye contact.
I served in the legislature, but I don't agree with everything that the legislature did, and I agree with you. I will tell you, as a matter of law, we have conflicting decisions. There was I think Oregon and Washington had decisions that went in opposite directions. One state held that it was a violation of the First Amendment to prohibit euthanasia, and the other held that a statute that had been passed forbidding euthanasia was unconstitutional. So at the moment, as far as the law goes, we have contradictory decisions, but as a matter of policy, I agree with you.
All right. What do you think? Do you think it's a violation? But
No, I agree with you.
The subject of this panel is religious rights.
Right.
So I'm seeing this. Would it be your view that this is a violation of the First Amendment?
Yeah, I would be.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So I know that you would like to have a longer discussion on that, and I encourage you to meet with the panelists if they're available afterwards. I just want to give a huge round of applause to our panelists who have donated their time today to come and be here. And I also want to give just a really big shout out to everyone who is here, who took the time to come here. And while we didn't solve anything, we don't have the answers. We could be talking about this forever and ever and ever. We did open dialogue about a very, very challenging topic. And we did so in a way that was respectful and that modeled exactly what the Arizona Interfaith Movement is about. Building bridges of understanding and harmony. And so huge pats on everyone's back. Go ahead and do that. Pat yourself on the back. Pat your neighbor on the back. Yes. Oh, I get to pat the mayor on the back because we just love our mayor of Mesa so much. And everyone who is here, thank you so much. I want to let you know about what's coming up in March. And this will fall right along with what we have today. March 15th is keeping up with the times, coping with societal change. How do faith groups deal with evolving social change? Do belief systems adapt as public values and ideas shift? Should faiths become more progressive? Does change lead to schisms within the faith? Should religions adapt with the times or remain fixed to their original tenets? So it follows perfectly along with this one. We already have all the panelists set up. So I invite you to come back and invite your friends to join us for this. And that really falls back to something Dr. Misra said, which we all clapped for, that really, you know, adjusting with the times is the key. We've got some adjusting to do, and we've got some modeling to do. And today we did just that. We adjusted, I adjusted to let David have the seat here, saying, hey, you know what, that's okay. I adjusted home, and we all adjusted, and we listened to each other. And oh my goodness, what a world we would have if this could be modeled in government and in the places that create our laws. So I'm going to call our executive director up. He's going to share with us a couple of events and also how you can become a partner with us in Arizona Interfaith Movement and also receive some calendars for small donations. So let me give Larry the mic.
Do I need a mic?
Yes, you do.
This isn't long enough. I don't need a mic. Here, Dave.
Yeah, taking that.
We're recording you do.
Oh, you're recording.
Okay, here you go, Larry.
All right. First of all, I want to say thanks for coming. Secondly, I want to say my very dear good friend, our executive emeritus, my predecessor, is here. And I am so grateful for Paul Eppinger. He is the godfather of the Arizona Interfaith Movement. He was the originator, the founder, the brains, the passion behind it all. And I am so grateful for Paul. He's been a great mentor to me. And Sybil, his dear wife, we've been friends for many years, and it's been great to have you be my friend, Paul. Thank you, panel. Great job. Wonderful, wonderful job. Just a few thoughts. This will be on our website. It'll also be on YouTube. So if you want to share this moment with other people, you're welcome to do so. I was sitting here thinking, as all of this discussion was taking place, if there was ever a time in our world when we needed the Arizona Interfaith Movement, it's now. Let me explain to you why. As Mitzi has said, we discussed a very intense topic. We talked about it with different viewpoints, but with respect for one another. And that's what the Arizona Interfaith does. We have 25 different faith groups, and we talk about issues, and we make forums like this available to the public. And we have interfaith forums that we call it Experience Interfaith, where people can come together. The Sikh community feeds us a longer meal. And then we talk, hundreds of us, in groups of 10, about our faith and how important it is to us. I learned about other faiths through that. And then we have our banquet on April the 7th, where we honor people like this. Tom Horne, David Engelman, honorees of our faith golden rule. Let me just tell a small story about Tom Horne. He told a small story on me, so I will now tell a small story on you. In 1990, I got a phone call that my son had fallen 45 feet in Africa. And I went to Africa to see the problem. Tom called my home, wanting to talk about me being on the board of the school, Paradise Valley. My wife told him that what had happened and where I was in Africa. And Tom said, "Why aren't you there?" And my wife said, "We couldn't afford for both of us to go, so Larry felt that it was important for him to go." Tom says, "Look, I'm leaving for Hawaii with my family at noon. I'm leaving a blank check at my home. You go in and fill it out as much as you need, and you go be with Larry." That's the golden rule. I've told that story many times, strange bedfellows, a Jewish man and a Baptist preacher. But when we came home, Tom and his dear wife didn't leave our sides for months, coming to our home, taking us to dinner, taking us to movies. This man knows what the golden rule is, and he lives it in his life. Thank you. If you haven't got our license plate yet, do that. This is what helps sponsor the Arizona Interfaith Movement. It's only $25 extra, and it says live the golden rule on that. It's amazing what it does to your driving record. You know what I'm saying? We have some books, and we have a calendar here, and the calendar has the dates of all religious holidays on it. So if you haven't got that calendar, you need to do so. It's by donation, and so you're welcome to take one. A donation of $100 or $1,000 will do it. If you'd like to become a member of the Arizona Interfaith Movement, and I can't think why you wouldn't want to be a member of the Arizona Interfaith Movement, it's a mere $25 a year. It's all it costs. And you have the rights and the privileges to everything that we have and we offer. And so we're just grateful for the opportunity to share this forum with you. Mitzi, great job as always. Thank you, panel. We'll see you next forum.